casual opening. Don't worry about us.
Yeah, me and Nicole are listening to other podcasts and we're like, gosh, they sound so cool like when they open up their podcast, and we sound so buttoned up when we're like, hello and welcome back to those astrology girls.
Me starting my own personal podcast the same exact way every single time forever.
Same. I did that too. We both have our own podcast, and every time I was like, how do I like not start it where I'm like, welcome back to my podcast.
Exactly. There's
host,
some
Keelie.
muscle memory that just happens as soon as I hit record. Then I'm like, hello and welcome to the Soul Bloom podcast. Boom, done. It's perfect
like,
every time.
No, we need to make this more fun, Nicole. Like, you and I are like way too fun outside of the podcast. And it's like, second we click record, we're like, hello.
Juicy episode ahead.
Yeah, same thing. This is the best. This one's so interesting. I notice I say that too, like at the beginning of every episode. I'm like, this is a really interesting topic, you guys. Or it's like the same thing. Like every episode is so interesting and so juicy.
But we really have picked the most interesting and juicy topics for these episodes. You know what's interesting though? I was at my in-laws' house just today, and I was telling her, I said, hey, I have to go. I'm actually going to record this podcast. And she goes, I heard it's going to be a really rough time with Pluto and Aquarius. And I almost like broke my neck, like turning my head to like look like, oh my gosh, you know about this. And she's like, yeah. And like a lot of other planets moving. And I was like, yes, okay, we've got this. So like, she knows the vibes of 2025. And, you know, my mother-in-law, I wouldn't have deemed her one of those astrology girls just yet, but you never know.
You never know who's on the other side of the mic or the headphone.
Yeah, she's ready, and she knows that this is going to be a big year. So she's like, can you send me the podcast again? I was like, yeah.
So many more people, I think, are going to be looking to astrology. I think that this is where the world is headed. Like, astrology is going to be like a thing that's not as like weird to talk about. Like, I think already like so many more people are open-minded. I was at like a very businessy networking event with like all sorts of businessy people, like not spiritual woo-woo people. And I was talking to them about like human design and astrology, and they were all just like so open-minded and like interested to learn about it. And I feel like those aren't types of conversations I would be bringing to those types of networking events, you know, even like a year ago, personally.
Yeah, exactly. Like I did disclose to some of my coworkers when we were going through a mega transformation at work last year when Pluto had just moved back into Capricorn. And I had said, I can tell you when this will end, like when this will be buttoned up. And they were like, when? Tell me. And I was like, November 2024. And they were like, what? That's so long, because it really did feel so long. They're like, based on what? Like, were you in a meeting? And I was like, no, it's the astrology. And then they like rolled their eyes a little bit, but then they were like, wait, tell me more. And so when I resigned from that same job this September, and I told people, they said, well, what are you doing? And I told them, you know, all the stuff I'm doing. And I'm like, oh yeah, and I'm an astrologer. I swear so many people were like, this is the best thing I've ever heard, and I'm so excited. And I was so shocked. I was expecting people to like ostracize me or make fun of me. And then I just started telling everyone, and I said, this is just great. You know, everyone's super open.
Yeah, I love that. You reminded me too, just the way people roll their eyes at like astrology. It's so funny because when I was at that networking event, some guy was like, oh, so is that like, you know, Enneagram and Myers-Briggs? And I rolled my eyes. I was like, no, I don't do those things. He goes, you just rolled your eyes like people do with astrology. I go, oh, well, yeah, human design is like astrology. Like, I don't roll my eyes to any of that, but I will roll my eyes to like the personality test. Like, don't compare that to astrology and human design.
Yeah, there's no comparison. It is a system. That is the only comparison.
And not to hate those systems. Like, Nicole, I know you ate those systems up. I'm just like, oh, no. Like, astrology, human design. Next level, guys.
Yeah, I just needed my Myers-Briggs in college to, like, get me through to feel like I could understand people. And now I'm like, okay, tell me where your Pluto is first off. Like, I can guess. And then tell me more about your whole chart. Like, your exact birth time, please. That's exactly what I need. And what city was that? Oh, yeah, okay, perfect. Be right back. And then I'm, like, in the corner typing all the information and, like, learning. For a long time, I would, like, secretly do this at parties. I was like, let me just like talk to these people, and then like once they kind of realize that they're normal and they're nice, you can do a little like couple testing questions to see like how woo-woo are they. And then I'm like, you know, like, can I look at your birth chart? And Mark was always like, oh my god, here she goes. You know, so it's a fun way to get to know people.
Well, one of my favorite party tricks is like guessing their rising sign, because that's who you're meeting on first impression. And it's so interesting. I was at a retreat event, and I was talking about astrology to one of the girls there, and she didn't really know much, but she was like, oh, I was telling her how it's like who we show people on a first impression basis is our rising sign. And she was like, oh, so could you guess my rising sign? And so I sat there and I looked at her. I was like, And I like guessed. I was like, you're a Cancer rising. And she goes, how did you know? I was like, that's wild. But that's like what people show. It's a really fun party trick. Anyways, I think I'm good at it.
That is a really fun party trick. I'm not the best at it, though. Someone said, who can you always tell, like, is like their sign, like, or that they have strong influence? And I was like, Virgos, 100%. Like, I can always tell a Virgo.
Wait, would
when
you
I
be
meet
able
one.
to guess I was a Virgo?
Oh,
rising?
absolutely.
Really?
Just look at Keelie's feed on Instagram.
That screams Virgo.
Yeah, it's very put together. It's very organized. It's buttoned up. Even just
True.
the way that you show up is very deliberate. And I just think that it's beautiful. But I'm like, if you were to go to mine, you'd be like, oh my God, this is chaotic and also like crazy, but also that's who she is, you know? So it's not a bad thing. But yeah, I can always tell a Virgo. I can almost always tell like when people have Aquarius vibes too, though. You do surprise me with your Aquarius.
I do, a lot of people, because it's a very different vibe than Virgo, you know, like on the surface. It's like underneath. It's like you only get to know the Aquarius side when you have conversations with me, probably.
Yeah. And that's totally understanding that, like, we are so much more than just one aspect of our chart. Like, that's, like, Keelie is the exact example of that. With me, I think I have everything concentrated in, like, 2 places. So, in Scorpio and
Nicole's
Capricorn.
like, you get what you get with me. Like,
yeah, there's no shocks here. Like, it's like, maybe you would be surprised at, like, my Aries moon a little bit. Or, like, my Capricorn, or my Cancer Jupiter. But, like, otherwise, it's, like, all pretty much on the surface. But if I could look at someone and guess their rising, I'd be like, wow, I'm so good.
Well, I think it's interesting too, also the words that people use when they describe you. Like the word that I get so often is people are like, you were so organized. And I'm like, I'm not even doing anything. I'm just like sitting here writing in my notebook. And it's like, gosh, like you're just so organized. And I'm like, it's just really interesting just how people perceive us, right? Because I could be doing something that I think is totally normal, but it's just, I don't know. That's our rising sign. That's like the energy. So I'm curious, Nicole, like do people use descriptors about like Scorpio to describe you ever? Like, is it like intensity or what is it?
Yeah, you're intense. You're just so like bold, like in your face, kind of like, you know, intimidating. I've been told I've been intimidating. You know who tells me I'm intimidating though? Men. And I'm like, okay, like whatever. Because I worked in a very male dominated field for many years. And so like they were always like, God, she's so intimidating. And not only that, but I'm nearly 6 feet tall. So I guess like between my like Scorpio depth and like
I feel
intensity,
that with Scorpio risings. I can feel that intimidation where I'm like, there's just like a powerful presence there that you're like, wow, I'm in the presence of someone really that's like has a really just strong energy.
Yeah, it's so funny to like imagine that. I kind of wish I knew astrology 10 years ago in the corporate world so I could have worked even better with people just to be like, like I know more about you than you know. And it's so interesting. I do look back though when I worked with a ton of Virgos over the years. And so I think that organization thing that like comes across for Virgos is like, I'll be like working the room and like talking to someone and understanding the strategy of something. And like my Virgo counterpart, like, you know, colleague will literally have done like set up a file structure, have like 3 emails written, have already started like a draft of like something important we had to do, and I'm not even done like working the crowd. Like I'm like not even done with that, but like somehow they've done like 800 activities that would have taken me like 2 hours to do in like 30 minutes, and I'm like, wow, this is great. And so like working on Virgos is awesome, but they will find all of the holes.
Which is so funny. That's so hilarious. I know, you're like, that's so funny. Okay, you guys. So today, Nicole and I are doing a little bit of a continuation episode from our last week's episode, which was all about 2025 astrology vibes. Today, we are extending that into talking about 2025 retrogrades.
Yeah, so we have some personal planets retrograding this year that don't typically retrograde every year. So this makes 2025 even more special. And when you listen to that episode about the big vibes of 2025 for the astrology, you're going to see like, it's a big deal. Like there's a lot of things happening. I mean, heck, my mother-in-law even is like understanding what's going on. And like, that's big that she knows. So, you know, thinking about retrogrades overall, like why do they matter? What are they? Why is everyone saying like, why is Mercury in the microwave? You know, like it's kind of a funny joke and people always blame it, but like, why is this important? And then how can we actually work with this energy and like be kind of safe with it and what not to do? So thinking about planets, like what does it actually mean when a planet goes retrograde? You might even see people call it like R and little X, almost like a prescription looking thing. I thought that was a funny little symbol for it. But I learned recently that planets don't actually move backwards. They don't actually, because I was like imagining these giant like structures in the sky, like, whoop, I'm just going to go backwards. I'm like, that must be chaotic. It feels like that. It's an energetic thing. They just appear to be moving backwards in terms of like where they are in the degrees and like how they're aligning. And each retrograde gives us 3 whole opportunities to work with it. So first it's moving forward, moving, you know, in a normal motion. It would hit all of these degrees. So imagine it's hitting degree 1, degree 2, degree 3. And then it says, oh, I'm stationing retrograde, which means I'm going to appear to move backwards. So then it goes from 3 to 2 to 1, maybe to 29, you know, keep on going backwards depending. And then it's going to move forward again. So you're going to have those energies 3 whole times. You already had it. It already hit 29 at some point, and now it's going to move forward again. So like every time we have a retrograde, you're getting those lessons multiple times. It's not just like this shocking experience. We're like, oh, Mercury's retrograde and like this energy is totally different. Yes and no, you know? So we'll kind of talk more about this energy sweep and how it affects all the different things. But they're allowing us to revisit stuff, you know, which I think is actually really cool. I think hindsight is 20/20 when it comes to astrology, and retrogrades give us hindsight in like 2 to 6 weeks, very quickly. Like it's not like this long process. We're getting that revision and that revisit very, very quickly. So I always like to think, okay, when a retrograde's coming, what happened in the past few months that's going to come back up again? It's almost like whack-a-mole. You're like, I thought I dealt with that. Nope, it's back in the retrograde, and it's perfect because that's really allowing you to heal it even more.
Yeah. I always think about one of the ways that I like to think about retrogrades, and I heard someone talk about this one time, but it's kind of like imagine yourself driving on a highway and like say you're just like going full speed, like you're just, you know, you're keeping up with all the other cars or you're going faster than all the other cars, and then all of a sudden you just start to like slow down. Right? And all the other cars are just like speeding past you. So it appears maybe that like you're going backwards, like if you're just kind of like looking at it like that, but really all it is you're just like slowing down so much where like it appears you're going backwards, you know? And so it's kind of just like that way of like perception. But you know, I think with like the retrograde planets, I always love to talk about them. Think about it like retrograde starts with RE. So like a good rule of thumb for you is anything that starts with RE is kind of what you are kind of the things that you're looking at during a retrograde period. So for example, think of like RE, review, okay, revise, reassess, reconnect, recommit, recharge, resolve. Like all of the RE words is what you're doing. And you're doing those things related to the themes of the planet that is actually in retrograde. So that's kind of one of the first ways that you can kind of say, okay, first of all, it's like this overall energy where like we're slowing down. And I really like to think of it as retrograde periods as being these built-in periods of time that the universe gifts us in order to slow down, reflect, reassess on the specific themes. And so, for example, if you think about, you know, Mercury is the planet of communication, of, you know, short-term travel and transportation and, you know, your mental thought process. So those themes of Mercury, when we're in a Mercury retrograde period, we are reflecting, reassessing on communication things. We're kind of taking communication a little bit slower. Maybe our thought process are going a little slower. It's not like a time for us to like be making mental decisions, you know? Same with like Venus, right? Venus is the planet of love, of beauty, relationships. So we're reviewing, reassessing, recommitting in our relationships. All right. And then same thing with Mars. Mars is the planet of like action and drive and energy levels. And so kind of, you know, taking a look, like where am I currently committing my energy and where can I maybe like recommit my energy or just like reflect on how I'm using my energy? Like what's not feeling good about how I'm using my energy right now? Like where do I need to take an opportunity to reflect?
Yeah. And I think that retrogrades, like, why are we speaking about Mars, Venus, and Mercury? Well, Mercury retrogrades all the time, every single year, without fail. And so it's one of those ones where we'd be like, oh, it happens all the time. Like, aren't we used to it? No, you would think so, but we're not. And it happens in different signs all the time. So we're going to give you the details of all of that. But Mercury, Venus, and Mars are all very close to the Earth. They're close planets. And so we pay attention to retrogrades this way because these are very personal planets. And we're going to feel them on a personal and collective level when they retrograde. Now, we should just mention the outer planets, like the big slow-moving planets, almost what we talked about exclusively in the 2025 overview vibe forecast. those are outer planets and they retrograde all the time because they move so slowly. And so we're not going to cover those retrogrades because they're not something we track and feel as deeply. But the closer to Earth, the more the intense that retrograde energy can feel. If we think about the moon and how the moon affects the tides, like it's close to us. We notice that energy. So thinking about Mercury retrograde, one of the ones we're going to cover, this happens 3 times a year. And it also has a 2-week shadow period on the beginning and the end. So once it goes and stations direct, aka moving forward again, that has a period of 2 weeks that we just keep attention to because it's not fully back up to speed yet, if you will. And so Keelie kind of covered those issues around communications, technology, travel, transportation, contracts, and like the mental process we have. And this year, Venus is retrograding, which is unique because Venus does not retrograde every single year. It only happens every 18 months. And Venus will retrograde for about 6 weeks. And so that's important because there's, Venus is so connected to love, beauty, relationships, money. And we think there's issues and themes that are going to come up around, relationships, beauty and appearance, pleasure, money, self-esteem, our values. And so this is a great time to pay attention to those things and just kind of being aware of those dates because sometimes these retrogrades can like sneak up out of nowhere and you're like, why am I so frustrated in this area? And it's like, okay, so this is why we want to tell you about it now so you can maybe like prepare yourself, do a little bit of inner work, and just kind of like avoid any tough situations. And then Mars only retrogrades once every 22 months. And we're currently in a retrograde as we record this at the end of 2024 into the beginning of 2023. And it's for 11 weeks. And so, I personally love this master number here. That's like Mars is 11 weeks retrograde every 22 months. But Mars is the planet of war, action, and our motivation and our energy. Issues around drive and energy. It can be a potential for low energy. You might feel a little sluggish depending on where this is impacting your chart. Motivation, taking action may be impacted, sexual problems, impulsiveness, argumentative. Also, you can get headaches and breakouts at this point. I've also been told to be very careful driving during Mars in retrograde because it can cause some issues and aggression, and that is never good when you're driving a car. So keep in mind these overall themes of these retrogrades and how they're going to play throughout the year, and we'll give you all the dates and like what signs they're in and make sure you're ready to go.
I feel like that driving a car and the aggression thing too is totally a Mercury retrograde plus Mars retrograde, which we were just in actually end of 2024. We were in a combined, they overlapped the 2 retrogrades, and that theme of like the transportation with the theme of like Mars being just also this planet of aggression, like those 2 themes overlap. And I think just on the most general of levels, if you know the themes of each planet and you know that they're in retrograde, then you know that there can just be issues, and it's just a time where you just need to like take things a bit slower, like thinking about with like Mars retrograde and like anger, it's like, okay, don't be so quick to react, like give yourself a little bit grace. And I'm thinking about Mercury retrograde, and Nicole mentioned this, how when a planet is in retrograde, it's usually passing over a specific point in your chart, 3 times. It's moving, forward, and it's perhaps going over a specific degree in your chart, and then it's moving backwards, back over it again, and then it's moving forward it again. So that's why when we have these retrograde periods, a lot of times things can like happen a little bit more intensely because you're feeling these things multiple times in a row. So it's not just like one quick hit where you're like, oh wait, sometimes we don't even realize when the planets are impacting our own chart. But when it's hovering over it 3 times, it's like, wait, what is like happening in my life right now? And why are these things continuing to happen? And it's just because, one, the planet is going slower. So it's like you're feeling it a little bit more intensely, right? A lot of times Mercury is such a fast planet that when it's just going around it, making its way around, the zodiac and hitting all the points in your chart, you're not like, it's happening so fast that you don't really like feel it fully. But when it's slow, it's kind of this like extended, it's like you could have a little tiff with someone and it's over like that. Or it's like you have this like full blown argument that you're like, God, like how did this like small little thing get like blown up and out of like completely out of proportion? And now we're not even talking to each other and we're just like completely like, silent mode. And it's just, everything's like festering. It's almost like that. It's like could be a quick tiff or like everything gets drawn out, and not to like create a negative connotation around these retrograde themes, but it's just kind of thinking about things in a little bit of like a more that's why you might feel things, and why sometimes retrograde and planets in retrograde get a bit of a bad rap, because people are just feeling things a little bit more intensely. And ultimately what it's doing is it's giving us an opportunity to just kind of learn more lessons. You guys, we are in this human experience. We are here to learn lessons. We are here to grow. And that's why I love astrology, and why probably a lot of people who love self-growth and self-development love astrology, because it's just helping us understand, okay, what are we here to learn? What in my personal chart is getting triggered by these, retrograde periods? Because that is an ask and a permission slip for me to just one, slow down and just reflect instead of being reactive.
Absolutely. And as you described all this, this could be this drawn out thing, or this could be a quick tiff. I just remembered I'm having trouble. Well, not exactly right now, but I've been having trouble with a fully electric car that I leased earlier this year, that I bought during Mercury retrograde. And I was like, I'll be fine. Everything's fine. And I've just had so many issues with this vehicle that I think it's actually quite comical that I thought everything would be okay. And it's not anything a deal breaker, but it's frustrating. And I've had to bring it to the dealership so many times to fix. And you know what the issue is? It is a technology problem, a communication error in a transportation vehicle. It hits all the big, the big things with Mercury. And I'm kind of like, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And now it's not to say you can't live your life and do stuff, but, electric vehicles are fairly new. It's not a Tesla. So it's not like they've really mastered this thing. And I was just like, oh, this is good. This is so cute. I like it. It's fast. It's perfect. It's a nice car. And now I'm like, aha, Mercury. That was definitely a lesson for me. And it was funny because the other day I got a notification on the car. And it was right as Mercury was kind of going direct, and it had the same issue it had months ago. And I was just like, no, not another one, And it's it's just kind of Mercury's way of LOL with me right now, I think.
LOL. You made this big decision during Mercury retrograde. Here you go. You knew better.
Yeah, 36-month
you can't
decision.
Make a big decision. But, it's just a time when, in general, right, whether you are, looking at a Venus retrograde in relationships, or a Mars and you're really wanting to take action towards this really big thing, or even Mercury retrograde, you're wanting to, again, make this mental decision or sign a contract or negotiate something. It's it's just asking yourself the question, okay, what maybe, where is there maybe more opportunity for me to really think through this? Or, they say you can sign a contract, but it's dot your I's and cross your T's. Just review the thing over and over and over to make sure nothing's getting missed, because just the planets moving slower, maybe our minds moving a bit slower, maybe we're missing things, maybe we're not seeing things super clear. And so it's just giving ourselves space, do not rush into a decision. I'm thinking too, anyone who has an emotional authority in human design, and it's you're meant to take your time with decisions, okay, times 10 during a retrograde, especially a Mercury retrograde, take your time. We're going to go through each retrograde. We've kind of talked about them high level. We've talked about retrograde high level. We want to go specifically into each of the retrogrades because, like Nicole described, we are having a Mars retrograde, a Venus retrograde, and Mercury retrograde. And all of that is happening also at the very beginning of this year. Like Nicole said, we're in a Mars retrograde already right now. So we've got a lot of retrograde energy that we're kicking off the year with, which is why we felt it was really important for us to have a specific episode just to kind of unpack some of these themes so that you can just understand how to really just make the most of this energy and really work with it in a really just loving way with yourself. Not being too hard on yourself during the retrogrades, not trying to push yourself to points of exhaustion, but really just understand what this means for you so that you can more so, live in alignment. So Mars is already in retrograde. It went retrograde December 6th of 2024. And it stays in retrograde until February 23rd of 2025. And during a Mars retrograde, what you can expect is just these shifts and maybe some of your goals, maybe some of your motivations, overall, some of the issues you might have on an energy level is thinking you might feel more tired, maybe more lethargic. You might lack some motivation, some low libido. It can trigger some also just maybe some unprocessed anger that you have. If something wasn't dealt with in the past and you just kind of let it sit and you didn't express yourself then, it might come back around to say okay, it's time to process this again. It's things are under review. So what hasn't been addressed? Where do you have some things that haven't been fully processed? If you're feeling lower energy or a lack of motivation, this doesn't mean that Mars is blocking you from moving forward. What it's asking you to do is it's saying, perhaps have the way you've been using your energy previously, perhaps is that not aligned? Perhaps have you been pushing and hustling and go, and using your energy towards something that actually isn't really like what you want to be using your energy towards? It really is an opportunity for you to kind of look at where are you not feeling energy to do something, and then say, okay, I received that. I don't have the energy to do this thing. Where have I been pushing way too hard? And where do I have the energy to give to something right now? So a lot of like kind of recommitting your energy in the way that you want to, commit it. It's not necessarily that you're being blocked from using your energy during a Mars retrograde. It's more so about a reroute. Okay, where do we need to redirect our energy? Maybe you're going hard in one path, you're shooting towards one goal, and all of a sudden you're like, I don't even know why this goal was even important to me in the first place. So I think that's one of like the big themes to think about during a Mars retrograde. It's been interesting for me personally too, thinking about just where my energy has been since December 6th. Where have I felt burnt out? Where have I not wanted to give energy? And then where have I, wanted to give energy? I was talking to Nicole. I'm like, we were just killing it with this. Like we were like showing up for ourselves, like with this podcast, like we're really having fun with it. We have a lot of energy to give to it, or at least I really feel like I have a lot of energy to give to it. But also there have been other things in my life where I'm like, I have no energy to do this thing then. And I've just given myself grace when I don't have the energy to do something. And I've also really leaned into where I do have the energy to give to certain things. And that's really what Mars retrograde is all about. I also just wanted to speak as well to just the way that we are kicking off 2025. I feel like a lot of people in this day and age, like I'm just hearing a lot of people like, I don't do resolutions, I don't do goals. I'm like, I love a good goal. I love a good resolution. Like everyone's like, I don't do those. And I'm like, oh yeah, they're like a bad thing. I'm like, no, I love them. So for me, that really is understanding that we are kicking off the year with Mars retrograde. I'm like, okay, if I, am creating a resolution for myself, or if I'm creating a goal for myself, with retrograde, it's good to know that sometimes it means you might have to restart something, right? Again, with that RE. So if you're committing your energy in one way and you're like, okay, for whatever reason, like my energy's not like fully, able to like commit itself, like I'm kind of falling short of some of my original goals, that's a sign, right? Mars retrograde being like, hey, where is there an opportunity for you to realign and like the goal that you set? Because maybe that's not actually like something that you truly want. And like maybe there's some small shifts and a little bit of a redirect and a reroute and where you want to take your goals this year.
I always think too with everything with Mars retrograde that there is this piece of there's an old goal that maybe you really wanted to do something, but you just didn't take action on that will come back to you during Mars and retrograde, where you're just like, oh, actually I was putting all this effort into one thing and now this other thing just feels so alive to me. Like, listen to that. This is not a time to sit back and not take action just because Mars is retrograde. This is a time to say, like everything Keelie just said about like, what do I actually want? And I think that's a really powerful time. And considering it happens almost once every 2 years, this is potent. Use this time for what it is. And, people will be ready to take a lot more action post, February 2025. But hey, if you're feeling it now, go for it. Use that Mars retrograde energy for what it is here for.
I was also going to add too, so this is something to think about with retrograde planets. Whenever a planet is going retrograde, you want to look at the degree of the sign that it's going retrograde in, and then you want to look at the degree of the sign that it's going direct in. The reason why it's really important to note when a planet goes retrograde and when a planet stations direct and knowing the degree that that's happening, if it's happening within 1 degree of one of your natal planets in your birth chart, then that means it's a really important retrograde for you. And like there's a really important lesson or just a really important theme that you are going to be experiencing for that retrograde. It's just a really important one for you. So for example, what's so interesting is that Mars went retrograde at 6 degrees Leo. My Jupiter is 6 degrees Leo. So seeing this That right there gives me so much information.
Yeah, I just realized that I will experience the similar, like a hit of Mars retrograding at 17 degrees Cancer with my Chiron. So that will be an interesting little thing. And it already did.
Your Chiron is 17 degrees Chiron?
17 degrees, yeah, Cancer.
Stop.
Yeah. So it already moved forward, but now it's doing it again. So I'm like, oh, what do I need to learn? You know, it didn't hit my Jupiter. It won't go backwards to my Jupiter at 10 degrees Cancer. But yeah, I always remember that, those big moments, those big degrees, like you said, especially 1 degree either side or exact, it's just really got a message for you. And so thinking of that, everything with Mars is super important because that doesn't happen that often. But Venus, also a major retrograde planet to pay attention to because it impacts so many things so close to our hearts and to our lives and our own self-esteem. This year in 2025, upcoming, we will experience a Venus retrograde in Aries and Pisces. So on March 1st, it will retrograde at 10 degrees of Aries. So if you have any planets around 10 degrees of Aries, just pay attention to that. And then it will retrograde through April 12th to 24 degrees of Pisces. And so that will be a whole 6 weeks where, we're reevaluating relationships, value, self-worth. This can include romantic partnerships. This can include friendships. This can include family and even relationship with yourself. Venus does not discriminate. And, Venus is like, hey, you don't have to earn love. And so it can feel really potent during a retrograde to feel like, what is going on? So in a relationship, Venus retrograding is going to feel like, are my needs being met here? Do I feel like any relationships are no longer serving me? I need to be released. Is anyone knocking on your door, coming out of the woodwork saying, hey, remember me? It could be a friend, it could be a business thing, it could be anything, but old flames really are like knocking on your door. People say that about Mercury as well, but definitely during Venus retrograde, things are going to be brought up to either have closure or be reignited. And so keep an eye out for that and ask yourself, is this relationship asking for closure or is this a new thing, right? So relationships will be under review. Don't think of that as a bad thing. It's just a great time to take stock and take inventory, but this is not the time to suddenly pick a fight with a loved one because it's just not going to go well. I pay attention to this a lot because I'm very bold and assertive. And so I can easily accidentally pick a fight with my husband and he's like the nicest golden retriever. And so I'm like, no, March 1st through April 12th, just be super, ask yourself, is this really important to bring up right now? Because I can accidentally probably start a fight without trying and I don't want to. So, in your life, you're kind of figuring out what's bringing me joy right now? What's filling my cup? What feels really good? What do I truly value? And you notice some of these themes kind of progress really nicely from Mars about taking action and what are you doing and these goals that you've been working on and what do you actually want? Now Venus is saying how do you really feel about this? From a different perspective. I love this part of Venus in retrograde because it's something that I always need to check myself on. It's how are you spending money? How much are you spending? What's working? What's not? And I think it's a great wake up call moment to say oh, you know what? Maybe I need to be a little bit more reserved, or maybe I'm hoarding money. I don't know. That's definitely a Taurus problem, not a Scorpio problem, but this is a great time to look at that. But this is also not the time to make major changes to your appearance. I joke whenever I talk about Venus retrograde with Keelie, I'm neither of us are going to cut bangs at this point. I think all hairdressers should be aware of this period and the weeks before and after. This is not the time to be I'm going to dye my hair a completely different color, because it's not that you shouldn't dye your hair or cut your hair or do something wild to your appearance. It's just more likely to not satisfy you or go wrong during Venus in retrograde. So if that's the point, if you want to do your hair completely different, February, May, great months to give it a whirl, but not March through April. Just give it a pause. And use your words wisely. Be aware of your own personal triggers and give yourself a lot of extra self-love during this time, because Venus is really important and it does affect our own self-esteem. And so making sure you're feeling extra good at this time will go a long way.
Yeah, it's kind of thinking about any action that you're going to take. If you take any sort of action on beauty or appearance during Venus retrograde, okay, you can expect to maybe have to redo it, right? It might need to be redone a couple of times. So if you cut bangs, yeah, you might not end up liking it. And you might be this was not how I wanted it. Now I have to go get it redone. I need to go find someone who can fix the mistake that somebody just made. So, and I think too, yeah, it could even just be even, well, I was thinking like if a Venus retrograde is happening during a Mercury retrograde, then that's like also like maybe a miscommunication thing. Like the hairstylist is like, hello, like I thought that you wanted it this way. And then it's like, no, I communicated that I wanted it like this, which actually we are going to have Venus retrograde overlapping Mercury retrograde from March 15th to April 7th when we have our first Mercury retrograde. So I was listening to somebody talk about this and they were like, yeah, when we've got this Venus retrograde and Mercury retrograde overlapping, maybe it's like not the best time. You want to plan a trip with like your loved ones or like your family members or your friends. Like it may just not be like super fun. It may just not be like what you expected it to be. So maybe don't plan a trip. And that's why I'm like, I love astrology. You guys, like, again, it's not like you have to follow this stuff to a T if it doesn't serve you or feel supportive to you, but also it might be like, hey, like here's how the energy is flowing at this time, and you might come up against a whole lot more bumps in the road if you're trying to like take a trip with a loved one or with family members or, you know, anything like that during that time. So that's just something to consider.
Yeah, I love that. My cousin actually, like when she was planning her wedding, you know, her father-in-law was like, you really should not get married during Mercury in retrograde, like even just for the sake of the contract, like everything. And she's like, we're looking at venues and you know how packed venues are. Like it's so hard to pick a date. And she's like, and all the dates we want, Mercury's in retrograde. And then I'm not saying you can't get married at this time. It was just a really funny like thing. And she goes, what do you know about this? And I was like, okay. I was like, it's not bad. I was like, but I would just make sure everyone signs where they're supposed to sign for your marriage license to make sure you're actually married. Like just double check everything, make sure everyone knows to show up at the right time. Like just be a little extra cautious. And she didn't end up getting married in Mercury retrograde, but it was funny that she was trying to avoid those dates. And it's hard because it happens so often throughout the year.
So what I want to talk about next is going a bit into Mercury retrograde. We talked about already like the March 5th through April 7th. Specifically, it's going retrograde at 9 degrees Aries, and then it's stationing direct at 26 degrees Pisces. So that's going to be our first retrograde of the year. Our second retrograde of the year is happening July 18th at 15 degrees Leo, and then it's stationing direct on August 11th at 4 degrees Leo. And then the third retrograde of the year is happening on November 9th at 6 degrees Sagittarius, and it's stationing direct on November 29th at 20 degrees Scorpio. So we've already talked a lot about just Mercury retrograde themes, but just again, kind of going over the highlights of it. It could be a time where there's like issues with, you know, anything that's like thinking, writing, editing, communicating, short-term travel, things like that. You know, it's a time where you're not really wanting to like sign a bunch of contracts. You're not wanting to enter into negotiations because perhaps you decide you want to enter into some negotiation and then Mercury retrograde passes and then you're realizing, oh gosh, like we forgot to include this, or oh gosh, like I misunderstood what they were talking about with this. So again, it's just like the misunderstandings, the miscommunications, those are just really important to just like consider during this time. So it's just really good to take your time if you do have sort of things like get a lawyer involved, get someone involved who can like double check your work or whatever. So yeah, I think that's kind of, we talk so much about Mercury retrograde, but really like these are just kind of the themes for you to just kind of know we've got a lot going on at the start of the year with Mars retrograde, Venus retrograde, and Mercury retrograde all happening. So just taking those into account, really looking at, okay, what degrees are they happening and are they triggering anything in my own chart? I was also listening to someone talk about this, but they talked about everyone's on a plane and the plane's going through turbulence. Okay, it's like somewhere up in the air and it's going through turbulence. Well, maybe like the people who are like in the middle of the plane or, you know, front of the plane are feeling it completely different than perhaps somebody who's sitting in the very back of the plane, right? We're all going through the same turbulence. We're all experiencing the same retrograde, but people might feel the turbulence very differently based on where they're sitting on the plane. And so it's kind of the same thing with your own chart. We're all feeling it to an extent. We're all experiencing it, but people are going to experience that turbulence of the retrograde a little bit differently based on what it's impacting in your chart. So take a look at the specific degrees that we talked about today. I don't know that I specifically pointed out for Mars retrograde for like the when it stations direct. Nicole kind of touched on it, but it stations direct at 17 degrees Cancer and it goes retrograde at 6 degrees Leo. So I just wanted to bring that up just in case anyone wanted to look at that for the Mars retrograde. And yeah, I think it's always fun to look at like kind of what's getting triggered in our own chart, like where are the lessons, and also just kind of where are the growth opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just overall a good rule of thumb. Anything that comes up during retrograde, Mercury, Venus, Mars, related to any theme of that planet, you might just have to redo it. It might be a second revisit, you know, like Keelie said in the beginning, all of those rewords. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of rewords, like resolve, you know, revisit, recommunicate. It just might happen. So don't sweat it. And like you said about the turbulence, it could feel totally different to you depending on where it is in your chart. And I'm looking at these going like, woohoo, like only a few of these are really like exactly touching my chart this year, but it always changes. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. And this is one of the first things I think from an astrological perspective that as you're learning your chart and you start to look at like major transits, like eclipses, of course, returns overall, like when you have like big moments of returns, or, you know, retrogrades. They're an easy way to start tuning into the astrological energy without knowing so much, and just see how it feels for you.
All right, you guys. So I think that is a wrap for today's episode. And thank you all so much for joining us and tuning in with us today for our 2025 retrograde episode. As always, we will be back with you guys next week for another episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, we would love to invite you to share it with a friend, share it on your social medias. Be sure to tag us at Those Astrology Girls if you do share it. And again, we would love to always invite you guys to rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on, if it feels good for you to do so. It definitely supports us in just getting this podcast out there as we start this fun Those Astrology Girls journey with you guys. So thank you all so much for being here again, and we will talk to you next time.
See you next week.